Right, this is section 3 of implication of DNA collection of juveniles. This is over the legal history of DNA collection and the ethical implications of DNA collection. So we're going to start off with CODIS, which was created in 1979. And unlike fingerprinting, when they first used it under a more general view, they were using it to identify civilian population. This time, it was strictly for criminals with its original use. And it started with when they started creating the DNA databanks, that they wanted to track the worst criminals. So for the worst that actually got out, they wanted to see if those individuals would reoffend a similar heinous crime. So there were certain things that got us away from just getting DNA from the worst criminals to widening that net to many criminals, and even some people who hadn't even been convicted yet. So the first one was the number of crimes that were being solved by DNA evidence. Due to that 80% of the prison population are habitual reoffenders, they were really using that DNA to track those habitual offenders and put them back in prison. It was helping police solve crimes at a faster rate and more efficiently. The other positive that was associated with DNA was the exoneration of innocent people from prison. The Innocence Project is its goal is to help people who say that they are actually innocent in prison to exonerate them through DNA evidence. There have been 73 men that have been exonerated through this program of crimes such as rape and murder. So the justice system really feels confident that they're getting the right people in their system by using DNA. But there was one last concern, and that concern was, such as with fingerprinting, when an expert comes on, the people didn't trust that expert because kind of the science was rocky at best. So the case of Daubert versus Merrill Dow Pharmaceuticals really set the standard of what would be admissible in court, so that any form of scientific methodology that would be presented could stand legal scrutiny. So this case is based on a medicine called Vindictine. It was used to help mothers in the first trimester of pregnancy deal with nausea, forms of discomfort, lack of sleep. And they had tested it on mice and rabbits. The rabbits ended up being fine. Mice were having some deficiencies with their legs and claws. When they switched over to human test subjects, they were finding that the babies were being born with limb deformities. And these two minors ended up having exactly that happen to them. Their limbs were deformed due to the drug. So in this case, the court ruled that a technique can be considered reliable if the scientific community as a whole stated that the test or the process was good, that they had a high degree of confidence that it would result in what they said the end result would be. So any form of test had to go through a scientific scrutiny, and then once it did, the court would accept it. This was really important because the court realized that once that had been set, that science had kind of passed the test, if you will, that juries were going to accept those experts, unlike in fingerprinting, as we saw in the Emperor case, and that they were going to have a high level of trustworthiness and reliability with those experts. So it's almost as if the court was predicting what was about to happen, because what started to happen is the CSI effect. It was a capital murder case. The suspect was Robert Jones, and the police had not collected DNA evidence in this case. And the defense attorney came out and said, "Where's your hair samples? Where's your blood samples? How do you know that he did X, Y, and Z if you don't have the DNA showing he was present during those actions?" And because prosecutors had no choice but to address this DNA evidence in trials, um, people started, after watching the show, caused them to think, yeah, if there's no DNA evidence in a crime, there's just not enough evidence there. It raised the standard of reasonable doubt in their minds. And so defense attorneys are jumping on the fact that if any case presented to them doesn't have some form of DNA evidence in it, that the case will probably be dismissed by the jury. So as states started to exonerate, as the stats for exoneration and crime solving continued to increase, and the demand for having some form of DNA evidence in those cases grew, each state decided, yeah, we're going to start changing the rules on DNA collection. We're going to start widening the net as to who we do collect from. So in 2000, the Bush administration passed the DNA Analysis Backlog Elimination Act. It is kind of hypocritical that they say that they're going to eliminate backlog for the labs, because the act actually stated that all federal parolees, probationers, and under federal supervision and custody would be forced to give DNA samples. So they're actually going to increase the amount of DNA the lab's going to have to process. So this introduced for the first time that DNA can be collected non-consensually. Back in section 1 where I talked about the blood draw, that's how they're going to take the blood of someone who refuses DNA collection. They can be taken to a hospital, or can be drawn right there at wherever law enforcement has taken them, to the police station, or the FBI has them in custody. They can draw it there. And if you resist, that's a felony that can result as much as, they're all different, but one of the largest I've seen is 5 years imprisonment, and I've seen up to a $100,000 fine. But each state's kind of different as to what the punishment is, but in all states, it is a felony to resist having your DNA be taken.